ViceGrip Garage is a completely original creation by Bieri. He brings them back to life with comedy, roughness, and a sincere heart, just like the rusty classics. Along the way, he developed a loyal following by transforming overlooked barn finds into viral gold. However, a portion of Derek's story was left out of the videos. A personal tragedy that changed everything lies behind the late-night wrenching and laughter. This has nothing to do with a malfunctioning engine or a failed project. It's far more profound. Because not everything in Derek's life could be fixed, even though his channel is all about second chances. You have probably heard of Derek Bieri if you have a fondness for vintage vehicles and the tales etched into their rust. He is the creator of ViceGrip Garage, a YouTube channel dedicated to reviving abandoned cars with passion and hard work. However, Derek's journey begins in Minot, North Dakota, on May 16, 1984, long before the wrench twists and engines roar. He didn't have a lot of money growing up, but he did have a strong work ethic, guts, and a lot of experiential learning. Growing up on a wheat and cattle farm in northwest South Dakota with his grandparents, Derek was surrounded by folks who never hired someone else to do something they could do themselves. The type of man who always carried a pair of pliers on his hip was his grandfather. Derek's father also went in the same direction. The Bieri family didn't have the luxury of new components or fast fixes, because they lived on a farm with few stores. Instead, they got inventive and pulled old vehicles from fields, patched them up just enough to last a few seasons, and then did it again. Derek's passion for wrenching really took off at that point. Showpiece restoration was not the goal. It was about using what was available, being resourceful, and surviving. He never learnt as much in a classroom as he did in the farm and beneath hoods from an early age. By the time he started high school, he was searching for old automobiles that he could repair on back roads with his best friend Chad. For a few dollars, they would get them to operate just well enough to drive or flip. They were essentially creating early iterations of what would eventually go popular on YouTube. Derek found himself hopping between a number of professions after high school, all of which had something to do with the automotive and transportation industries. It's evident that he looked at almost every aspect of those early gigs. Even though he hasn't disclosed every detail, he did everything from getting his hands dirty with mechanical work to getting a behind-the-scenes peek at the business side of the auto industry. These positions turned into a crash education in real-world management and machine mechanics. Derek was learning more than simply engines, whether he was working on automobiles, trucks, or even big machinery. He was learning about logistics, customer service, and the day-to-day operations of running a business. His practical experience provided him with a special combination of white-collar expertise and blue-collar skill. Derek eventually advanced into the corporate world, even securing a couple so-white jobs in the process. In addition, he started and managed a number of his own companies. But something never felt quite right, even with the business cards, suits, and titles. He secretly wished he had the garage, the authentic, unadulterated sensation of revitalizing vintage metal. By 2018, he was at a turning point in his life. Everything seemed ideal on paper. It wasn't fueling the fire, even with a steady salary and job stability. At that point, he had developed a strong interest in Motor Trend's Roadkill, a program that focused on repairing damaged vehicles and making them drivable. The light bulb went out at that moment. Derek came to the realization that he has spent his entire life doing the same thing. He thus recorded himself putting an engine, a transmission, and the front clip on a 1969 Chevy Camaro that same weekend while a broken iPhone was strapped to his garage door. No elaborate production, no expensive gear, just unadulterated enthusiasm captured on film. And that was the unofficial beginning of ViceGrip Garage. Shortly thereafter, he departed entirely from the office life. Grease-stained coveralls took the place of the suits when they were retired. ViceGrip Garage formally established an LLC that same year. The mission is straightforward. Look for old abandoned vehicles that are rotting in barns, farms, or junkyards, and attempt to restart them using the fewest possible tools. Derek took a distinct, refreshingly honest approach. He never aimed for showroom perfection in his videos. They were about the trip. Each one told a tale of abandoned cars receiving a second chance at life, not only of broken bolts and dead batteries. The restoration of a dilapidated '72 Chevelle, now called Independence, is one of his channel's most cherished tales. This rehabilitation project wasn't your typical one. It was one of Derek's greatest difficulties, and his personal favorite. The car was in horrible condition. The panels were torn. The floors had collapsed, and it was rusted out. To be honest, most people would have thrown it in the trash. Derek, however, noticed something more. The car felt like a metaphor because of its patriotic red, white, and blue paint job. Like the nation from which it originated, it is worn down but not out. Derek described how the Chevelle's weathered appearance made him think of the tenacity of regular Americans in an interview with Drive Tribe. The rebuild was driven by that emotional bond. He threw all his energies into restoring it, piece by piece. And when the engine did eventually start, it roared with pride and spirit rather than just running. For good cause, it became a fan favorite. Independence was more than a vehicle. It came to represent perseverance. ViceGrip Garage is powered solely by narratives. Derek is more than simply an auto mechanic. He tracks them down in America's lost corners. We're talking about old outbuildings, overgrown tree lines, barns, and any other place where a rusting jewel might be concealed. Every rescue seems like a hybrid of a mechanical Hail Mary and a treasure hunt. And part of the magic is that uncertainty. It's impossible to predict what he will bring home next. Derek's backstory adds even more interest to it. He didn't advance through the ranks of the conventional mechanics. No ace credentials, no technical school, just a lot of perseverance, a keen mind, and real-world grit. His relatability stems from this. He's not attempting to be flawless. He is simply learning as he goes. His method of trial and error serves as a reminder to viewers that making mistakes is okay, as long as you continue to advance. Derek developed more than simply a fan base over time. He earned people's trust. He demonstrated more than simply his building prowess. He demonstrated the actual, unvarnished procedure. The minor successes, the moments of uncertainty, and the bruised knuckles. And that honesty touched a nerve. He became more than just a YouTuber, as a result of the respect he received from the automotive community. Gearheads who enjoyed the grind just as much as the finish found a voice in him. But Derek's narrative isn't the only one in ViceGrip Garage. The whole family is involved. Behind the scenes and in front of the camera, his wife Jessica is a key player who jumps into projects and helps determine the direction of the channel. Their children are also involved in the activities, Bentley in particular. He already has his own spin-off, Little Grip Garage, where he works on dirt motorcycles and go-karts. He's learning the principles and the tools that helped create the company from the ground up with his father by his side. The Bieri family lived in Minnesota for a long time. They ran the garage, raised their children, and created their life there. However, everything changed in late 2021. The Bieris took a risky move. They moved to Tennessee after packing up all they owned. This went beyond simply changing one address for another. Their future, both emotionally and professionally, needed to be reshaped. Derek clarified that Tennessee had a significantly cheaper cost of living than Minnesota. It was so intense that it seemed like day and night. The savings were evident when they tallied the mortgage, rent, utilities, taxes, and insurance. The icing on the cake was Tennessee's exemption from income tax. Derek spent a lot of time and money while establishing his YouTube account, but he didn't get much of a return. However, this action allowed him to make the most of every dollar and demonstrated how financially challenging the move had been. The absence of significant auto events in the north was another problem. They were remote from the action because they lived near the Canadian border. The majority of the major shows, particularly the ones Derek wanted to see, were in states like Florida. While there were a few smaller local performances here and there, it would take 3 days to go there from Minnesota. He would lose a whole week for a one-day concert. That same drive, however, barely takes a day now that they are in Tennessee. They have saved a ton of money on food, lodging, and fuel just from that. More significantly, it has made it possible for Derek to attend more of the major events that his followers like. Derek's wife, Jessica, also gave a taste of what life was like in the past. Between his stores, Derek would drive one way for more than an hour. That amounted to roughly a month of driving time over the course of a year. It became difficult for Derek to see his family because he was working 7 days a week. He was aware that something needed to shift. Now that they have a new arrangement, everything looks very different. It used to be rare for Derek to spend Friday night movie and pizza nights with his wife and family, but now he has time to do so. According to Jessica, the type of childhood they both desired for their boys was a major factor in the decision to relocate. They both grew up in rural areas and wanted to provide their children the same independence and outdoor experience. Even using a snowmobile on one's own property could result in someone in Minnesota contacting the police. That kind of stuff is commonplace in Tennessee. They valued the freedom to utilize their land as they saw fit. The weather was another factor. Winters in Minnesota were more than just inconvenient. They acted as a barrier. For someone like Derek, who spends a lot of time beneath cars and shoots practically everything outside, months without the ability to create were caused by harsh winters. Because of Tennessee's gentler climate, Derek is able to shoot footage almost all year round. More videos, more projects, and more time spent doing what he loves are all part of it. Ultimately, the relocation was more than a simple logistical decision. It had to do with lifestyle. The Bieri family discovered a place where they could develop as a close-knit family, as well as content producers. Above all, it allowed Derek to continue doing what he does best, which is to share the joy that comes from turning on something that was previously thought to be dead, and to make people smile through his movies. Eventually, something even greater was made possible by that same enthusiasm: Motor Trend's roadworthy rescues. This was no ordinary car show. With heart, grit, and a few broken bolts along the way, it felt more like a real-life road trip. On September 28, 2022, it made its formal debut and immediately gained popularity on a variety of channels, providing fans with more of their favorite things: honest builds, compelling narratives, and Derek doing what he does best. The show followed Derek, his 3 boys, and his wife Jessica, as they traveled across the United States, and even into Canada, on a mission to restore abandoned cars. These vehicles weren't from showrooms. Most had sat in barns or fields for years, and the difficulty remained constant. With some simple equipment, bungee cords, zip ties, and a lot of imagination, you can get them going and drive them all the way home. Every rescue felt like an adventure and a gamble. However, the show was finally canceled, in spite of the fans' passion for roadworthy rescues. Nor was it by itself. Around the same time, well-known games including Roadkill, Phantom Works, Hot Rod Garage, and Full Custom Garage were shut down. All of these films were from Motor Trend Studios, and the wave of cancellations appeared to come after a significant leadership change, following Motor Trend's acquisition by Warner Bros. Discovery. Since then, there has been a great deal of ambiguity about whether these episodes will be taken up by other TV networks, or even by websites like YouTube. The cancellation didn't seem like a significant setback for Derek. Although roadworthy rescues did help spread the word about his efforts, YouTube has always been his true home and the driving force behind his success. Derek has a genuine knack for reviving these abandoned machines, and ViceGrip Garage has showcased some amazing barn finds throughout the years. A few of them are flipped in order to make quick cash. A permanent place in his collection is earned by others. For instance, consider the Cadillac DeVille. That automobile was left fully unattended for more than 20 years. But Derek was unfazed. Rolling up, he noticed the ancient beast's potential and got it to run again. With over 3.5 million views, the video became a fan favorite. The Ford Gran Torino Elite, a true showstopper that hadn't been driven in almost 30 years, followed. That would have been a hard pass for most individuals. For Derek, however, it was the ideal canvas. He captured every stage of the change, bringing the automobile roaring back to life with a little effort and expertise. Now fast forward to a 2023 episode. In this one, Derek arrived just as a 1973 Plymouth Duster was peacefully reclining in the grass under the sun. He had a daring scheme: make a hot rod out of this vintage coupe. The Chrysler Slant 6 engine that came with the vehicle only produced about 145 horsepower. Not nearly enough for his purpose. One thing was implied by that: change the engine. Known for being almost indestructible, the Slant 6 got its name from the way it sat at a 30° angle in the engine room. Derek, however, had a much crazier idea for this build. He installed a fully customized V8, which he referred to as a Frankenstein engine, constructed with a Chrysler 5.22 L block. Standard pistons, Dodge Viper rods, and unbranded heads with Chevrolet valve trains completed the modification. Ultimately, this one-of-a-kind mix and match produced an incredible 485 horsepower. Derek inspected the Duster carefully before putting the new engine in. It was quite sturdy. Nothing really alarming, but for minor interior wear and some rust. The car's personality was drastically transformed after the new engine was installed, after a few humorous moments of removing the old one. Naturally, not all of the vehicles he saves are in a state of disrepair. He occasionally finds something, like the 1987 Buick Regal Type, that simply needs a little TLC to get back to its former glory. The T-Type went unnoticed, in contrast to its well-known siblings, the Grand National and GNX, but it had a 3.8L turbocharged V6 engine in common. Even though it only had 200 horsepower, it was still a fast and nimble vehicle, a real sleeper thanks to a sportier suspension. This specific type was discovered by Derek in northern Michigan. Since December 2000, it has been hidden away in a storage container. The car was neglected for more than 20 years after its owner died shortly after parking it. The car didn't get any attention again until the widow realized she had been paying for the unit for years. Derek took on the task of making the entire unit roadworthy so that he could travel 750 miles back to Tennessee after purchasing it, furnishings and all. The vehicle was in poor condition, with corrosion and dust all over it, particularly at the door sills. However, after it touched down at his friend's house, things began to improve. The red interior is nearly perfect. It had only had 2 owners, according to service records, and had never been out of Michigan. Derek started working after changing the battery and thoroughly cleaning it. New tires, a brand new fuel tank and pump, and a protective layer of chassis paint applied to the underside of the wire. Now that everything was in order, it was time to examine the engine's ability to start. He tested the ignition and changed the fluids, and sure enough, the engine started up immediately. It wasn't flawless. Considering how long it had been asleep, it ran a little rough. A miracle occurred. The gearbox was also inspected. However, in order to clear the system, he later had to add fuel additives and replace a few leaking fuel lines. The brake system was the main problem. It was totally ruined. Since it was impossible to locate original parts, Derek constructed his own brake lines. In addition, he changed the rear brake parts, wheel bearings, calipers, pads, rotors, and seals. A few new lines began to leak even after that, necessitating additional repairs. The T-Type eventually drove out on its own after the brakes were firm, riding on brand new 235 6,015ths Coupe Cobras for the first time in 22 years. The Regal appeared wider and meaner than before. However, the trip back to Tennessee wasn't without its difficulties. The air conditioner was the first to arrive. The refill can didn't work with the old system, and it was hot. That was resolved with a short trip to the hardware shop for an adapter. Then a drive shaft seal started to leak. It might have emptied the gearbox entirely if he hadn't caught it in time. Derek used newly purchased jack stands to handle the repair in a parking lot. The leak ceased as soon as the seal was changed, and the Regal traveled the remainder of the way without incident. It depends on what occurs when the cameras stop rolling. Derek keeps a few cars, particularly those that have unique meaning or a memorable narrative. To maintain the channel and finance the subsequent rescue, he sells the remaining ones. Derek's unwavering vision lies at the heart of ViceGrip Garage's constant progress. He has been clear from the beginning. His passion is building budgets. He is not a wealthy upscale mechanic. He is a dedicated blue-collar worker who works 7 days a week to demonstrate that car ownership need not be prohibitively expensive. Flash has never mattered to Derek. No matter how bumpy the road may be, the goal is to get vintage automobiles moving. Get on the road and enjoy yourself. His approach to each build reflects that mindset. Derek already considers preserving 1 car per week to be a victory. It must be employed in order to actually save a car. Because of this, some of the masterpieces he brings back to life, such as the Monte Carlo and the Chevelle, occasionally wind up in the hands of other people. He fixes automobiles for more than just fun. He is ensuring their survival. He has always recognized that without the help of his supporters, none of this would be possible. In many respects, ViceGrip Garage is a community project. Derek has consistently made an effort to use that platform to inspire, as well as to amuse. Whether it's via expressing appreciation, promoting generosity, or igniting younger auto enthusiasts' enthusiasm. This channel is more than just content in his opinion. It is a means of giving back. Derek Bieri has repeatedly demonstrated one thing throughout it all. To revive lost masterpieces, you don't need a nice store or a lot of money. Numerous abandoned machines still lie in fields, barns, and backyards, waiting for someone like Derek to help them find their way back. And he is the only person who is capable of doing that.